For years, the mysterious relationship between Princess Diana and Princess Anne has intrigued the public. Two strong women walking under the imposing shadow of the monarchy, yet always keeping a curious distance. Then an unexpected revelation tears through the buzz surrounding the royal family. A letter believed to be from Diana, once sent privately to Princess Anne, has finally been found after mysteriously disappearing for years. This is no ordinary letter. It holds handwritten lines filled with emotion, confessions, and perhaps truths Diana never shared with anyone. Why did it vanish? Who kept it hidden all these years? And what does it say that made it a secret worth bearing? All is beginning to unfold. And this story may completely change the way we see the relationship between Diana and the British royal family. Join us as we uncover a secret buried for nearly 3 decades. The relationship between Princess Diana and Princess Anne is one of the least discussed yet most complex and layered dynamics within the British royal family. Two women, two strong personalities, two entirely different approaches to royal duty, and perhaps because of that, they were never truly close. From the beginning, Anne did not take kindly to Diana. As the only daughter of Queen Elizabeth II, Princess Anne was raised in a strict environment that valued discipline, tradition, and personal sacrifice. She disliked ostentation and was particularly critical of what she considered a lack of seriousness regarding royal responsibilities. Diana, on the other hand, entered the royal family with innocence, gentleness, and emotional depth. She quickly captured the hearts of the public with her warmth and emotionally expressive nature. It was this rapid rise to popularity and influence that made Anne uncomfortable. Anne saw Diana as overly emotional and too focused on image and media attention. She was known to have criticized her sister-in-law for crying in front of cameras, considering it a sign of weakness unfit for a senior royal. Diana, in contrast, viewed Anne as cold, distant, and somewhat dismissive. Despite her efforts to build a positive relationship, Diana's attempts were often met with indifference from Anne. From the beginning, their relationship was complex. Diana's warmth and charm had captured the public's attention, but Anne was adamant that duty came before feelings. She did not tolerate theatrics or what she considered needless public spectacles. She believed Diana was too eager to please and too preoccupied with the praise she received. Their initial interactions had not been cordial. Diana had tried her hardest to get close to her future sister-in-law in the months before her marriage to Prince Charles in 1981. She desired to leave a positive impression and demonstrate her respect for the strict customs of the royal family. Anne, however, didn't care. She didn't want to entertain what she saw as Diana's attempts to win people over with her charms, since she had witnessed too many newcomers try to fit in with what they believed a royal should be. One instance in particular caught our attention. Diana's wedding was only a few weeks away in late June. In an attempt to bridge the gap that already appeared to be growing between them, she had gone in search of Anne in hopes of sharing a moment of connection. She had used the formal phrase customary in royal circles to welcome Anne with respect. However, Anne hardly paid attention to her and hardly raised her head from her work. Diana had retained the coldness of that moment, and their relationship was evident going forward. Anne had no desire to be her friend. However, what was the reason for Anne's first resistance to Diana? A lot of people thought it was just personality differences. Anne had a reputation for living a straightforward life as a queen. She put in a lot of overtime behind the scenes, carrying out her responsibilities without looking for recognition. Nevertheless, she had always been overlooked in spite of her commitment. She had never been the subject of such intense media attention as Diana. She felt that was unfair. Diana's every action was watched and praised, while she toiled tirelessly with little acknowledgement. With time, the resentment simply became stronger. By the early 1980s, Anne was regarded as one of the most diligent royals. She had performed hundreds of engagements, giving her all to the duties that were required of her. Then Diana arrived. The story had changed because of her innate ability to engage the public, her sincere curiosity in people's lives, and her indisputable charm. Anne's work had lost its appeal to the world. Diana was everything they desired, Another little but important rift developed during this period, which is still seen to have contributed to Anne's coldness toward Diana. Many people thought Anne would be Prince William's godmother when he was born in 1982. Charles had, after all, been Anne's son Peter's godfather. Naturally, the favor was expected to be repaid. Diana, however, thought otherwise. Diana chose someone outside of the immediate royal family who was more dear to her than Anne. This choice was not overlooked. Already feeling eclipsed by Diana, Anne was now publicly rejected for a role she had thought would be hers. However, it didn't stop there. At the very least, Anne anticipated that she would be taken into consideration when Prince Harry was born in 1984. Diana, however, chose someone else once more. Anne took it personally this time. Anne's answer was instructive. Anne was conspicuously absent on the day of Prince Harry's christening, even though the rest of the family was present to celebrate. Her formal justification was an earlier engagement. However, a lot of people thought it was an intentional remark. Anne stayed at her Gloucestershire home and hosted a hunting party while the royal family gathered at Windsor Castle. The rejection was silent but unmistakable. The message was straightforward. She had no need to be there if she wasn't important enough to be included. Diana never mentioned Anne in public, despite these conflicts. She made no mention of their lack of intimacy or the aloofness that had pervaded their exchanges. However, it was present. And now that this letter was at last discovered, it brought up fresh issues. Had Diana made one last attempt to get in touch? Had she tried to make herself understandable, to heal whatever rifts had formed between them? The most urgent of all, maybe, was why Anne had never admitted it. Why hadn't she said anything if she'd gotten it? Had she written it off as she had written off Diana years before? Or was there anything far more nuanced to the truth? Everything people believed to be true about Diana and Anne's relationship may be changed by one letter. However, one had to go back even farther, to the years when Diana's life started to fall apart, when she was more alone than ever, and when writing became her only means of escape, before realizing what it meant. Because if Diana had actually written to Anne, it's possible that she was searching for understanding in her later years, something she had never encountered before. Diana had always been aware that the royal palace walls were dotted with customs and unwritten laws that govern relationships, conduct, and even feelings. She had been attempting to negotiate the intricate web of expectations for years, but by the early 1990s, the facade was starting to fall apart. A harsh reality that she could no longer deny had long since supplanted the idyllic vision of her marriage to Prince Charles. She was by herself. Her position in the royal family also deteriorated, along with her marriage. By 1992, the murmurs were so loud they were deafening. Every second of Diana and Charles's more tense public appearances had previously been scrutinized by the media. It was far worse behind royal walls. Diana felt stuck in a life she had lost her identity in. She had no allies in the royal household. Her marriage was crumbling, and her mental condition was getting worse. She had often attempted to enlist the help of individuals close to her, but she had been met with icy indifference. Although the royal family had always maintained an aura of emotional constraint, Diana frequently thought that this separation was intentional. She had told close friends that she was seen as an annoyance, a disturbance of the meticulous order the monarchy had established over the years. Additionally, her relationship with the rest of the family only worsened as her marriage fell apart. There had been a time when she thought someone like Anne may have understood her difficulties in spite of their differences. However, she was mistaken. A cornerstone of traditional royal duty had always been Anne. Anne wore the crown without complaining, but Diana strained under its weight. She was not sympathetic to public confessions or emotional outbursts. For Anne, Diana's media appearances, her intensely private interviews, and her readiness to talk about her difficulties amounted to a betrayal of all that the monarchy stood for. Diana, however, thought she had no other option. A watershed was reached in the 1990s. British Prime Minister John Major made the startling announcement that Charles and Diana were formally divorcing in December 1992. Even though the news shocked the entire globe, it was not shocking inside the palace. For years, the family had anticipated this. They had no idea how Diana would choose to present her version of events. Diana sat down for an intense interview with the BBC's Panorama in 1990. The choice that would alter the path of royal history was one of the most pivotal moments of her life. She discussed her failing marriage, her battles with bulimia, and at a moment that would go down in history, Charles's affair with Camilla Parker Bowles. With serene assurance, she stated, "There were three of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." The interview was an outright insult to all that the monarchy stood for. It was emotional, unfiltered, and candid. Additionally, it was the last rift in her ties with the royal family. She became an outsider after that, no longer merely the future king's estranged wife. According to reports, Anne was incensed, just like the rest of the royal family. She believed that Diana's interview was a needless show, a public humiliation that undermined the monarchy's credibility. More significantly, though, it confirmed Anne's opinion that Diana was a never cut out for life in the royal family. Diana had, nevertheless, written to Anne in spite of their disagreements. The fact that the letter had been kept secret for decades demonstrated Diana's desire to convey a significant message. However, why to a lady who had always avoided her, what could she possibly have said? Diana's life changed course in the months following the Panorama interview. No longer was she subject to the same royal duties. She went above and beyond what was customarily expected of a royal in her charitable endeavors. She became known as the People's Princess as a result of her humanitarian activities in nations plagued by landmines, her trips to AIDS clinics, and her work with leprosy sufferers. By stepping out of the royal shadow and into a light she had created for herself, she was rewriting her legacy. However, she was also growing more susceptible. She was more vulnerable than ever to the media and those who wanted to dominate her tale, since she lacked the royal family's protection. The last chapter of Diana's life would occur in the year 1997. She also appeared to feel that time was running short. In the months before her untimely death, she sent more letters than ever before to friends, co-workers, and confidants she could trust. Every one of them had a sense of urgency that suggested something more profound, something she worried might happen. She complained about being observed in one letter. In another, she talked of the difficulties she was under and her dread of being silenced. Although she was aware of the dangers of speaking up, she had never been one to keep quiet. What would she have said in a letter to Anne then? Diana probably didn't think Anne would be friendly in return. If anything, she might have written to express something that no one else in the family was willing to hear, rather than to try to patch up their connection. Maybe she wanted Anne to know what she had experienced. Maybe she hoped Anne would eventually see Diana wasn't the bad guy the family had portrayed her as. However, Anne never mentioned the letter for years. No one was aware that it had even been written, and she never acknowledged its existence. Its existence was not made public until 2024, when a private collection of Diana's letters went up for auction. An envelope that had been unopened for decades, containing a solitary note addressed to Anne. It contained the information Diana had always wished to be heard by a member of the royal family. Diana had been a writer all her life. She found comfort in writing down her thoughts long before she was the most photographed lady in the world, and her life was being examined by every tabloid. Writing letters allowed her to process feelings she was unable to voice aloud and to speak her mind when no one seemed to want to hear it. However, the tone of her letters changed as the months of 1997 went by. They conveyed a sense of urgency and subdued despair, as though she was aware that time was running out. That summer, Diana found herself in a difficult situation. She was released from the restrictions of royal service but also lost the protection that accompanied it. When her divorce from Charles was completed in August of 1996, no longer formally known as Her Royal Highness, she had lost her royal title and was now just Diana, Princess of Wales. Although it was a minor element, it was significant. She was more exposed than ever without the royal institution's protection. Her life had taken a significant turn. She spent a lot of time outside of Britain and had begun dating Dodi Fayed, the son of millionaire Mohammed Al Fayed. From her charitable missions to war-torn areas, to her yacht excursions in the Mediterranean, the media relentlessly followed her every step of the way. However, those closest to her felt something different. Even if the outside world saw a woman welcoming a new chapter, she couldn't sleep comfortably. She was also afraid that something was about to occur. Diana had told pals that she felt like she was being watched and monitored. She wrote to her former butler, Paul Burrell, in October of 1996, stating that she thought there was a plot to get rid of her. She described evil powers operating in the background and a developing paranoia that she was unable to get rid of. Diana's letter to Anne contained more than just an effort at reconciliation. If this was her state of mind at the time, most likely it was a warning she thought Anne needed to hear. This message, for reasons she alone knew. However, why Anne was not the only member of the royal family who had ever been friendly to Diana. She had never been an ally or confidant. She had been critical, aloof, and often downright contemptuous of the world's favorite lady. Diana had a friendship with Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, and it would have been much more sensible for her to write to her. Still, she had picked Anne for some reason. Maybe Diana recognized a quality in her that others did not. Despite their disagreements, Anne had long been regarded as the most self-reliant queen, living by her own rules and defying convention. She was known to be direct, practical, and unreservedly honest. Perhaps Diana thought Anne was the only member of the family who could deal with the truth and relate to what she had gone through. Although the exact date of Diana's letter writing is unknown, experts who have studied her final months think it was written sometime between May and July of 1997. In her life, this was a pivotal time. She was making news for venturing into politically delicate areas, stepping up her humanitarian efforts, and continuing her crusade against landmines. When she visited Angola in early 1997 with the Halo Trust, a group devoted to clearing landmines, it was one of her most important acts. Since then, one of her most well-known photos was taken there as she passed through an active minefield. She demonstrated that she was more than simply a royal figurehead and that she was a force for change with this audacious act of disobedience against political leaders who had disregarded the matter. However, it also endangered her. Diana became more outspoken about her worries in the months that followed because several influential people did not like her meddling in foreign issues. And could this letter have included information regarding something Diana had found out about if it was intended to alert Anne, something she thought the family should be concerned about? The letter might have been more intimate as well. In her last months, Diana was just hoping that someone in the royal family would recognize her for the woman she truly was. Not the people's princess, not the media spectacle. She adored her two boys more than anything else. The woman who had attempted to make a marriage work but failed. The woman who had battled her personal issues only to encounter icy indifference from those who were meant to be her allies. No matter what Diana wrote, it was not read by anyone for over 26 years. Anne never mentioned it. Its existence was never acknowledged by the palace. The letter appeared to have been sealed away, never to be seen again. Nevertheless, that changed in 2024. Royal historians and collectors took notice when a private collection of Diana's letters was offered for sale in Essex. The majority of the letters were the same type that the world has already seen. They were thank you notes to her staff and communications to close friends. However, one was very noticeable. Princess Anne was the recipient of a single sealed envelope. For decades, it had remained unopened, and it became evident why. The envelope had been sealed for more than 26 years, hidden away in a private collection, its existence unknown to the general public. When its contents were eventually made public, however, those who had spent decades researching Diana's biography were shocked. When the letter was eventually opened in 2024, nobody had anticipated what was within. It was neither an attempt to reveal the monarchy's secrets nor a last-ditch appeal for assistance. It was far more disturbing because Diana had written about the future as well as her personal hardships. Only a few months before Diana's untimely death in Paris, the letter was dated early in the year 1997. The words, written in her characteristic cursive, were as genuine and profoundly felt as those found in all of her correspondence. The tone, however, was striking. Diana wasn't writing out of regret or sadness. She seemed to be aware of what was about to happen because she was writing deliberately. She talked about the difficulties she had faced and how she had attempted to work her way through a system that did not have room for someone like her. She talked about how she had been silenced when she attempted to speak her truth and how she had been cast out for not fitting in. More than anything else, though, she wrote about the monarchy's future and how Anne, of all people, would eventually influence it. Nothing Diana said was resentful. No rage. Rather, there was a startling clarity, as though she had already come to terms with her fate. She voiced her worries about the organization that had embraced her at one point, but abandoned her when she most needed it. In addition, she made a prognosis that today seems uncannily correct. She thought the current form of the monarchy would not last, that the customs that had guided the royal family for centuries were fading, and that the next generation would not tolerate them. She talked about William and Harry and expressed her concern that the strict standards set for them would cause them to completely leave the institution. The letter's most surprising element was when she addressed Anne personally, speaking to her as someone she had grown to view differently, rather than as a sister-in-law. Diana said that they had never really understood each other and that they were different. However, she also noted that she respected Anne's strength and her capacity to perform royal duties without looking for approval or recognition. She acknowledged that in many respects, Anne was everything she had attempted and failed to be self-reliant, unfazed, and unconcerned with how other people saw her. The question that persisted long after the letter was read, however, came next. When I am no longer able to protect them, would you? It was a terrifying request, implying that Diana had already accepted the idea that she would not live to witness her son's adulthood. She was requesting that Anne, who had never been affectionate toward her and had never publicly backed her, take care of William and Harry while she was away. And why not the Queen or even Charles? Diana might have thought that Anne, in spite of her icy demeanor, was the only one who could provide her sons with what she herself was never able to direction without intervention, support without spectacle. Anne has never been one to play into public narratives or control the press. She had led a modest life, carrying out her responsibilities without seeking praise. Perhaps Diana had thought that Anne would be the only one who could guide William and Harry through a life she had considered intolerable. In the years to come, everything changed when this letter was discovered. It made people reevaluate Anne's position within the royal family and wonder if she had ever heeded Diana's advice in private after Diana's passing. Had she ever been in touch with William or Harry? Had she ever tried to be the person Diana had imagined her to be? The palace's decision to remain silent about the letter's veracity only served to feed rumors. However, others who had examined Diana's handwriting, communication style, and frequent use of letters to express herself thought it was authentic. It was not the shocking disclosure that many had anticipated. It didn't reveal betrayal, conspiracies, or affairs. Rather, it was something much more human, a mother's last-ditch effort to make sure her kids wouldn't be left alone, even if she wasn't there. Had Anne, however, paid attention, Anne continued to be as quiet as ever in the years after Diana's passing. She never interacted with the media the way others did, and she seldom ever discussed family issues. However, several people started to detect minor changes when they looked back. Although Anne had never been close to William and Harry when they were little, it has been said that she worked behind the scenes to give them the autonomy to direct their own lives. Anne was the one who had pushed for reforms that would give younger royals greater freedom and a more modernized monarchy. Additionally, Anne was one of the few family members who did not publicly criticize Prince Harry and Meghan Markle when they declared their intention to leave their royal duties in the year 20. Was it because she recalled what Diana had said? In addition to raising a lot of questions, the letter's appearance in 2024 gave closure. Diana's narrative had been recounted for years from a tragic, lost potential in what might have been perspective. This letter, however, was unique. It wasn't a tale of remorse or hopelessness. It was a last act of optimism. Even though Diana knew she was losing the fight for herself, she never gave up on her sons. Her words had reappeared decades later, serving as a reminder of the freedom she had always desired for them. However, the question still stood, had Anne really done what Diana had asked of her all those years ago? Or had it been disregarded as Diana had been for a large portion of her life? The royal family had desired its secrecy. Old arguments concerning the royal family, its customs, and the cost of duty were rekindled when Diana's letter was made public. The monarchy had long taken pride in its capacity to adapt to changing times and uphold the traditions that had guided it for generations. Diana, however, had witnessed what others would not recognize. She had seen that the world was changing, that the naive awe of royal customs was waning, and that the monarchy would inevitably fall apart due to its own inflexibility if it did not change. Her words to Anne were a silent warning about what lay ahead, not merely a request for her sons. And now, and 26 years after her passing, the warning seemed more pertinent than before. The royal family continued as if nothing had changed in the years after Diana's death. They lamented her in public, but the institution was still as cautious and private, bound by duty and expectation. William and Harry were raised inside the same inflexible frameworks that had previously choked their mother. But no matter how hard the palace tried to keep things under control, Diana's influence could not be eliminated. Her impact permeated every aspect of the monarchy, influencing both her son's self-perception and how the world perceived the royal family. Both William and Harry started making decisions as adults that were more in line with their mother's principles than with the customs that were forced upon them. William, the future king, approached royal life in a contemporary manner, striking a balance between his responsibilities and his strong feeling of autonomy. He wed Catherine Middleton, a commoner, and the two of them brought up their kids in a way that felt very different from how previous royal successors had been brought up. Warmth, relatability, and a clear desire to provide their kids with the most typical existence possible were all evident. Diana had hoped that William would accept his job, but on his own terms. Harry, however, made a much more dramatic move. Citing the same difficulties Diana had encountered decades before, he and Meghan Markle made the startling decision to completely leave royal life in the year 2021. History was being repeated with the constant media intrusion, the lack of security, and the sense of loneliness. Furthermore, it was evident that Diana's concerns were valid when the pair opened up about their experiences in interviews. The organization remained unchanged. No one had learned, and the younger generation had started to rebel, exactly as she had anticipated. For her part, Anne continued to be silent, unwavering, and committed to her duty as she always had. She never addressed Diana's letter in public and never mentioned whether it had affected her in any way. However, there were minor, hardly perceptible changes in the years following Diana's passing. Long a supporter of a more condensed monarchy, Anne maintained that not all royals had to shoulder the burden of official responsibilities. She supported efficiency, pragmatism, and letting certain family members live their individual lives. Whether deliberate or not, this way of thinking reflected the life Diana had envisioned for her sons, one in which they were free to follow their own path. Anne refrained from joining the public criticism following Harry and Meghan's departure. She didn't seem disappointed or worried. Rather, she said nothing, just as she had said nothing in response to Diana's letter in 1997. Diana's remarks are still relevant as the monarchy finds itself at a turning point. The letter's message was ageless, even if it had been hidden for decades. The world is less inclined to accept royal customs without challenge these days. Demands for accountability and modernization are replacing the notion of unquestioning allegiance to the crown. The question that the royal family can no longer avoid is whether they will be left behind or if they can actually progress. Diana anticipated this long before anybody else did. She realized that the monarchy's future would depend on accepting change rather than holding on to the past. It remains to be seen if the institution would eventually take her warning seriously. Ultimately, the letter was about more than just Anne or William and Harry. It concerned something far more significant, a mother's last effort to influence the course of events. It served as a reminder that tradition shouldn't come at the expense of humanity and that love and duty don't have to conflict. One thing is certain, though, as the world continues to consider Diana's life and legacy, her cautions, her words, and her outlook on the future will never be forgotten. Princess Diana's life remains a mysterious veil, filled with hidden shadows never fully revealed and unanswered questions. From silent tears to radiant smiles before the public, from conflicted relationships to quiet sacrifices, Diana was not only a symbol of compassion, but also a woman carrying countless secrets within her. The deeper we delve, the more we realize her life was not simply a tale of tragedy or glory, but a complex symphony of light and darkness. If you are captivated by these unsolved mysteries and want to continue exploring the emotional story behind the icon named Diana, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the upcoming videos. The journey to decode the People's Princess is far from over.